Before you start using Adobe Flash Creative Cloud, you must understand the basic user interface. To begin, we're going to start right in the middle of the application. The application has a big white rectangle in the middle of it right now. This area is known as your stage. The stage houses all your different types of media. So if you want to put video, photos, vectors, or animations, among many other formats, you would end up putting them onto the stage. And that's where you're going to end up creating all of your work that will end up showing up in your final application. Now, depending on what type of platform you're trying to develop for, the stage will have different dimensions and values. So right now it's a big white rectangle because we're just using the basic desktop application creation. Now, if it was a mobile application, you would have different dimensions as well. Now, around the stage is this gray area, and you're probably used to the gray area because we discussed it when we were talking about Adobe InDesign. This gray area is known as your pasteboard. If you have any type of items or material that you just don't know where you want to put it yet, but you're trying to place it in the right spot and organize it accordingly, you can put it on the pasteboard and then easily click and drag it over the stage to apply it later. Now, if you have items that are just on the pasteboard alone, they won't show up in the final application. But if that item is half on the pasteboard and half on the stage, the half that's showing on the stage will end up showing in your final application. So just be careful of that. Now, below your stage is your timeline. Your timeline holds your layers. For those of you that like Adobe Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator, you're likely used to seeing your layers to the far right side of the screen. For those of you that like video and use Adobe After Effects and Adobe Premiere, this probably doesn't bother you whatsoever. Because when it comes to the video and animation department, Adobe has all their layers found on the bottom of their applications rather than to the right. Now, you'll also know the bottom left you have create a new layer, create a new folder for organization reasons, and you can delete the layer. To the right of the layer is your actual timeline. The timeline goes 24 frames per second. So for 24, these little rectangles is the equivalent to 1 second. And each and every single rectangle you see, or in other words, frame you see, can have a different thing display or be showing in the stage above. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But what I want us to do right now is I want to go to the far right side of the screen to something we're more familiar with. These are your tools. And you'll probably realize that most of these tools kind of came over from other Adobe programs. You have your selection tools, your lasso, your pen, your text, among several other ones you're used to. For this demo, I want to use just a rectangle tool. Now, when I left click on the rectangle tool, you'll notice that this window over here called Properties, the one we discussed in the earlier video, will end up changing according to that tool I'm using. So left click, and right over here, you'll notice that all of the properties have changed. So now it says what I'm using. It knows that I'm using the rectangle tool. And then it gives me the options of what I can do with the rectangle tool. So if I wanted a blue stroke, I would just left click on the color and then left click on the value that I want. If I wanted a white fill color, I would just do the same. I can then change my stroke. And then I can also change what type of style or line goes around it. So basically, for every tool you use over here, you will end up getting a different properties window, depending on what you're trying to create. So it does come in handy depending on what you're trying to use and what you're trying to create. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick with the rectangle tool. And I'm going to go over the stage and left click and drag. Now that I did that, you'll notice that my actual rectangle does show. So it's just that easy to bring a shape onto the stage. So this is the part where it feels more like Photoshop, because you can just easily and quickly go over to your tools and then utilize them on your stage. So then you can type, you can change color just as you would with all the other tools. And then you can just left click and drag and move. So most of the tools you'll see to the right are ones that you're used to. Now last but not least, right between the stage area and the properties window is this little toolbar. This just has a few additional tools that you're used to. It has your colors, which you can end up clicking on and changing to specific colors. And even in here, it has your fill and stroke color, depending on what you're trying to use. You also have your swatches tool. So for those of you that want specific Pantone colors, or those of you that just like specific values of colors, you can find them in here. Then you also have your align feature. So this will end up aligning not only your shapes and objects, but your words, your videos, everything in that nature, as long as you have them all selected. And then the other few tools we have info. So it tells you specifically the width, the height, the X and Y coordinates, and the color value of specific items on your stage. So as you notice right now, I'm hovering over the blue. And if I go back to info, it will tell me specific information about it. And then going down one more, you have transform. So we can end up rotating, skewing, or we can end up doing 3D rotation and 3D center point with this tool. The other tool that's down here is known as your motion presets. And we're going to hold off on that for now because that's going to dive into another rabbit hole that we'll discuss later. Overall though, you have now witnessed the basic user interface of Adobe Flash Creative Cloud.